Roger had never felt so lonely in his entire life. Yes, he celebrated Christmas with his family, but he was alone. His parents were together, his 3 brothers and sisters had their own spouses and children. But for the first time in 12 years, Roger was alone. He had divorced his wife of 11 years, just 2 months earlier, and now, during a season that had always been devoted to family, he was alone. God bless his mother, 2 sisters, and brother. They tried their best to make Roger feel loved and included. Everyone in the house knew, except his father. Emotionality was not his thing. He tried to maintain his composure, patting Roger on the shoulder as his only display of emotion. Roger knew that this was the best version of his father's love. It was as effective as what the rest of the family tried to do. You really can be alone in a crowd, Roger thought. The family opened lots of presents under the tree. Everyone oohed and ahed, laughed and teased each other as only a family can. Roger tried his best to pretend he was enjoying it. He didn't want to spoil it for anyone, especially his 7 nieces and nephews. Christmas is especially for children. Uncle Roger had no intention of participating in the fun. Roger couldn't help thinking about the one gift that wasn't under the tree, a 1.25-carat diamond necklace. It wasn't under the tree because it wasn't meant to be a gift. About a month after Christmas, in January, he received a large sum of money for the necklace. It was for his then-wife Tracy, who was the love of his life in January. It wasn't until February that he found out she had been cheating on him for 6 months, and 2 weeks later, he hit her with divorce papers. At that point, he thought about returning the necklace for a full refund, but he just couldn't even bring himself to look at it. Roger loved this woman with all his heart and soul and was absolutely certain that they were together for the long haul. He realized that there really is no one as blind as those who cannot see. Roger had noticed that the couple's sex life had slowed down about 6 months earlier, but he told himself it was because Tracy and he had been married for 10 years, and that was normal. What he didn't notice until further reflection was the secretive way she read her messages and never let her phone out of her sight. He trusted her completely and never, ever thought she would betray his trust. Of course, even in his wildest dreams, Roger never expected someone outside his family to pronounce his last name correctly, and when it happened, he just had to stop and talk to the person who had just done the impossible. One Thursday around lunchtime, a first-tier supplier dropped by unannounced, and Roger decided to impress him with a magnificent lunch. Roger took him to the best barbecue place in town, on the other side of town, about a 35-minute drive away. Roger had probably only eaten there 3 times in the last 11 years, but John Steiner deserved the best. When it came time to pay, Roger put his credit card down with the bill, and when the waitress returned, she thanked him by name, correctly. Like many other Polish names, the spelling has nothing to do with the pronunciation, so when she pronounced Zikswakrat as Zikut, Roger almost fell off his chair. He and John looked at each other in shock. "How do you know how to pronounce that?" he asked the waitress, who appeared to be of Asian descent. "You don't look Polish at all." "When you see that name 2 days in a row, you remember it," she laughed. "Apparently, I served a couple of your relatives at lunch yesterday, and I just had to ask how to pronounce the name." "Is Tracy Zikswakrat a relative?" "I didn't catch her husband's name, although he was quite a character. They were a rather attractive couple." John realized that the waitress was referring to Roger's wife, and Roger blushed bright red but managed to control himself. "Yes, she's a member of the family," he said. "She and her handsome husband are a bit of a couple, aren't they?" "I'll say. Sometimes I felt like I was interrupting a couple of horny teenagers. I hope I look as good as that woman when I'm in my 30s. Tracy was actually 37, but with a solid body and an abundance of curves, along with flawless porcelain skin and long dark brown hair, she could have passed for a late 20-something. Roger guessed that Ha-Ah-Sum, Mr. Zikswakrat, was actually Joey Brilliant, a salesman with a lush head of hair. Tracy had been working at the same insurance agency in administration since around the time she and Roger got married. Joey Brilliant had appeared in the office about a year ago, and Roger had heard about him almost every evening after work for about 6 months. Then Tracy suddenly stopped talking about him, as if he didn't exist. Perhaps another clue that Roger, Mr. Trusting, had missed. John and Roger drove to the office in silence. Roger wasted no time in hiring a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, the investigator had obtained evidence, including a video recording of the lovers having sex in Tracy and Roger's bed on Wednesday morning, an hour after Roger had left for work. The investigator warned Roger that the video was graphic, but Roger, of course, was not even remotely prepared for such disrespect. "That fucking bitch!" Roger shouted at the computer screen as he watched what was happening in the privacy of his office after work. Without hesitation, Roger instructed his lawyer to file for divorce. A week later, Tracy was fired from her job. After watching the video of his wife and her lover in his marital bed, Roger had no problem embarrassing Tracy in front of her colleagues. Roger returned home early in the evening as Tracy pulled the car into the garage. She practically ran into the house and started yelling at her husband. "What the hell are you doing? Embarrassing me in front of my friends and colleagues and my boss, for God's sake!" she screamed. Roger sat back in his chair, sipping his Lizette Boy bourbon from a glass on the table next to him. He calmly finished his drink and put the glass down. "Because I wanted you to feel at least a little bit of what I felt when I watched you and Joey Brilliant sleeping in our marital bed, you whore. You could have at least told me that our marriage was over. You didn't have to defile our marital bed. And don't you think I deserve at least some kind of apology?" Roger refilled his glass, and Tracy stared at him. It had just occurred to her to ask how long Roger had known and how he had found out. "At least have the decency to tell me what I did wrong and how long this has been going on," he said. "Oh, and is this guy the only one you've been seeing?" "Don't be so rude, Roger," Tracy snorted. "We've been having sex for about 6 months, and Joey's the only one. It just happened. You didn't do anything wrong. It just happened." Tracy's eyes filled with tears. "What the hell is she crying about?" Roger thought to himself. "She's the one who cheated, and I'm the one who got cheated on. So you're saying that one fine day Joey was walking past you in the office, slipped on a banana peel, and fell on you? Okay, that sounds plausible. Good story." Tracy stared at her husband with her mouth open as he poured himself another drink and sipped it calmly. For some reason, it hadn't occurred to her that her husband would find out about her affair, and if he did, how he would react. It suddenly dawned on her that she had taken advantage of her husband's love in a terribly inconsiderate way. Roger's family was as devastated as he was when they found out about Tracy's betrayal. After all, they had been married for 11 years and seemed like the perfect couple. The only thing missing from their perfect marriage was children. Although the couple had decided to have 2 children when they were planning their life together, Tracy kept putting off starting a family until one day Roger asked her if she was breaking their agreement. Tracy tearfully admitted that she had, and no amount of arguing from Roger could change her mind. It was a tense few months for the couple until Roger finally told Tracy that he would let her do as she wished. Mary Hewson looked sadly at her husband. Last Christmas, with all its warmth and cheer, seemed so far away, she thought. This Christmas, with the recent divorce of Tracy's eldest daughter, seemed almost ghostly. Yes, the house was full of their second daughter's family of 6, but Tracy, without Roger, seemed to be walking in a bad dream. Besides, Roger had always been the life of the party when the families got together. Although he and Tracy had no children of their own, he loved his 4 nieces and nephews and had always been there for them. For their part, Mary and George Hewson simply adored their former son-in-law, and Tracy's meager attempts to explain why their marriage had fallen apart never seemed adequate to them. Roger told his relatives that the decision to divorce was Tracy's, and he would not discuss it further. Tracy felt the tension in the family as they spent several days together before and after Christmas. She thought that being with her family would help her overcome the malaise she felt inside, but it turned out that being around her family had the opposite effect. It seemed like everyone was waiting for a better explanation for why she and Roger had divorced. And it seemed like her sister's children blamed her for Roger not being around. The Housings didn't invite Joey to their family Christmas, and Tracy didn't fight for him to be there. She would miss his lean, muscular body next to her in bed at night, but she wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of him being an outsider. Realizing that it had only been 2 months since the divorce was finalized, Joey didn't put up much of a fight when Tracy told him she was going to her parents' house for the holidays without him. Tracy was stunned when she was handed divorce papers at work one afternoon in late February. She had no idea that Roger knew about her affair. She had been so caught up in her personal life that she felt terribly embarrassed when she was served, and she was almost certain she had caught Joey smirking in the background. She drove home furious, but her anger turned to confusion when she ran into Roger. He was quiet and calm, and seemed more interested in his bourbon than in arguing with her. Besides, she knew she didn't have any good answers to his questions. He seemed to know a lot about the case, including the fact that she and Joey had been on a date in his bedroom. When Roger mentioned it, she even thought it sounded tacky. She told Roger the truth, that she didn't want it to happen. Almost all the women in the office swooned when Joey joined the staff. His good looks and charm quickly won over most of them. Tracy noted that the young man was very skilled at flirting and seemed to be very good at the game of seduction. She didn't seem too concerned when Joey started chatting with her, believing that she was immune to Joey's advances since she was completely in love with her husband. The casual lunch turned into a casual dinner as Tracy told her husband several times that she had to work late. She admitted to herself that she enjoyed Joey's company and that this man was definitely handsome. On their 5th dinner date, the couple ended up in a hotel room, and Tracy hesitated for only a minute before ending up under Joey. Tracy was somewhat surprised that she didn't feel overwhelmed with guilt as they washed up and got dressed. Physically, she felt great and wasn't too worried about her husband. Completely satisfied with her young stud, Tracy refused to have sex with Roger. Joey's youthful enthusiasm, his overall strength and sexual stamina, combined with the illicit nature of what they were doing, kept Tracy hot and ready to go for as long as the young man wanted. Afterward, the two would cuddle, talk, and laugh. Perhaps it was unintentional, but the longer they were together, the closer Tracy grew to Joey. Since Roger always trusted Tracy and gave her space, she didn't feel pressured in her relationship with Joey. The two were never open about their relationship in public and were always careful with their dates, except when they occasionally used Tracy's marital bed at Joey's request. The young man found it extremely arousing to be with Tracy in her marital bed, and being confident that they wouldn't get caught, Tracy had to admit that she found it arousing too. Once Tracy got used to being serviced, she and Joey began spending more time together, and not just having sex. In his strong arms, she found peace and security, just as she once had in Roger's embrace. She was surprised at how easy it was to forget her husband. Joey Briglione missed Tracy when she left to visit her parents for Christmas. The couple had begun their affair more than a year ago and had grown closer when Tracy's husband, Roger, filed for divorce in February. The divorce was finalized in October, and Joey and Tracy were considering moving in together. They discussed Joey accompanying Tracy to her parents' house, but Tracy decided to go alone after her mother told her that her boyfriend was not invited and not welcome. This actually suited Joey fine because he wanted to spend some time partying with his friends, which probably wouldn't happen if Tracy was around. To be honest with himself, Joey hadn't planned on being with Tracy for very long, but she was a beautiful woman and damn good in bed. When he first pursued her at work, he knew she was married, but that had never bothered him before. He had seduced several married women. He just hadn't planned on anything long-term. The plan changed when Tracy's ignorant husband apparently stopped being ignorant after about 6 months and filed for divorce. Joey couldn't believe that Roger had essentially just walked out on his wife without putting up a fight. Joey couldn't figure out if Roger was stupid or cowardly, and discussing it with Tracy didn't bring him any closer to an answer. The strippers were in full swing, and on the night before Christmas Eve, the party was going strong. Joey left his friends around 1 a.m., accompanied by a pretty blonde who had been drinking with Joey and his friends for several hours. "That damn guy is so good-looking that women just can't keep their eyes off him," one of Joe's friends said to another. "I bet that girl is half his girlfriend's age." The men chuckled. It had been almost 5 years since Roger had last seen Mary Hewson. He had always liked Mary and George. They had been very kind to him over the years and had nothing to do with what their daughter had done. Roger still sent birthday and Christmas cards. When Roger entered the Italian restaurant, Mary was already sitting at a table. Although she and George lived an hour's drive south, she had asked Roger to meet her at one of his favorite restaurants near the apartment he had moved into after his divorce. The thought of the divorce brought tears to Mary's eyes. Roger had been a great guy, and even now she couldn't understand what Tracy had done. When Roger approached the table, they embraced. "It's been too long, Roger," Mary said. "George and the rest of the family have missed you. We love you, Roger, and nothing Tracy did will change that." "And I love all of you, guys," Roger replied. "I'm sorry I distanced myself from you." "We understand, son. It's all right. But I have a selfish reason for wanting to see you. Remember Tracy's cousin, Bunny, the youngest of her bridesmaids, who joined the Air Force shortly after the wedding? Well, she's back in civilian life and just got a job at an aerospace company in your town. I was hoping you could show her around, introduce her to the right people, and just point her in the right direction. Honestly, that's all I'm asking." Roger smiled crookedly at his former mother-in-law. She feigned surprise. "That request was either for you or my daughter, and right now neither George nor I are particularly pleased with how Tracy is living her life, let alone helping someone else start a new one." Roger nodded in agreement. Enough said, he thought. A few days later, Roger called Bunny and invited her to lunch at the same restaurant where he had met Mary. He really didn't know what to expect, because the last time he had seen Bunny, she was a thin, fair-haired, freckled 19-year-old girl preparing to join the Air Force. Now she was 36. The only clue Mary had given him was that Bunny no longer had freckles, and her hair had darkened. Roger waited patiently as the waiters escorted 3 single brunettes to other tables. The 4th brunette turned out to be Bunny. Roger was more than surprised. She was well built from top to bottom. Roger thought that her time in the service had undoubtedly enriched her physically, and her sparkling blue eyes would make her the darling of single men throughout the city. Roger decided that lunch had gone well. Bunny turned out to be very intelligent and more than held her own in the conversation. Roger reminded himself to call Mary and thank her for setting him up with Bunny. Roger enjoyed Bunny's company so much that he invited her to lunch again and then to dinner and a concert. He definitely needed to thank Mary. Tracy sat at a table in the restaurant waiting for her date. At 43, she was still a beautiful woman with a firm, curvaceous body thanks to regular visits to the gym. Her date was a 50-year-old accountant. She was looking forward to a pleasant, if uneventful, evening. Right now, she was happy to accept the pleasant. After her divorce, Tracy thought her relationship with Joey was moving in a positive direction, perhaps toward marriage. The sex was amazing, and her emotional feelings for Joey continued to grow. However, about a year after the divorce, Tracy noticed that both the sex and her emotional attachment to Joey had leveled off. She often wondered if the sexual decline was related to the fact that sex was no longer illegal. As for the emotional decline, Tracy often thought back to her marriage to Roger. She missed the little things she shared with Roger, the light touches, the sweet nothings he whispered to her after sex and at breakfast. She and Joey often spent time together while living in each other's apartments, but that feeling of closeness just never seemed to develop. Tracy began to suspect that Joey was seeing other women. The couple had not discussed exclusivity, but Tracy assumed that would happen after the divorce. When a burning pain in her private parts confirmed that she had an STD, Tracy knew her suspicions were correct. "You're a fucking bastard!" Tracy yelled at Joey when she got the confirmation. "I gave up marrying a good man for you." Joey didn't know what to say. He just grinned across the table. A light bulb went off over Tracy's head. 2 years later, with her STD long since cured, Tracy stood up to greet her date and chastely kissed Fred Myers on the cheek. As she leaned in for the kiss, she noticed that Fred was wearing Frederick Mall's aftershave, the same expensive aftershave Roger always used. She hadn't thought about Roger in half a day, she smiled to herself. Joey definitely enjoyed entertaining Roger's wife. She was prettier than most of the other men's wives he had met, and she was a great lover. So many women just lay there like dead fish. Tracy was not one of them. She seemed to enjoy the illicit sex as much as he did. Joey noticed that the excitement began to wane when Roger filed for divorce from Tracy, but her emotional dependence on him seemed to grow. At first, Joey enjoyed the intimacy, but then he began to see it as a heavy burden. After he had been exclusive with Tracy for about 2 years, his interest in other women began to resurface. He occasionally met other women in secret and soon contracted syphilis. He didn't have time to tell Tracy before she found out that he had passed his problem on to her. She was upset that she had contracted an STD, as well as what the disease meant for their relationship. Joey lost sleep over his breakup with Tracy. It was a grand party in honor of Roger and Bunny's 25th wedding anniversary. Roger surprised his wife by renting a party room at their favorite restaurant and inviting friends and family, including the couple's 23-year-old son Daryl and 21-year-old daughter Abigail. No one was surprised by the role of his ex-mother-in-law. 5 years after Roger divorced Tracy, Mary asked him to help Tracy's younger cousin, who was returning to town after serving in the Air Force. The lunch turned into a relationship, and Roger learned that Bunny had divorced. "You set me up, Mom," Roger said with a crooked smile when he met Mary after learning about Bunny. "That was a really good plan, Mom." Mary smiled broadly and chuckled. Roger looked embarrassed. "It wasn't a plan, Roger. I swear," Mary said quietly. "I just asked you for a favor. I didn't expect it to last. I knew you hadn't been dating much since your divorce, but I never thought—" "I can't tell you how happy George and I are. You know we've always thought highly of you and love Bunny to death. We know you'll do right by this girl, just like you always did right by Tracy when you were married." "Wow, Mom. You're getting a little ahead of yourself, aren't you?" "I don't think so, Roger," Mary replied. "You two look great together. She's got your heart, hasn't she?" "You know me well, Mom. So, let's say this really happens. Who do I call Mom, you or your sister Grace?" "How about both of us? Grace may deserve the title, but it would hurt me deeply if you called me anything else after all these years." Mary was right, Roger admitted to himself. Bunny had his heart, and about 13 months after their first dinner, the couple tied the knot. No, Tracy wasn't invited, by mutual agreement between Bunny and Roger. Mary and George mentioned this omission only once, and that meant they understood. A year later, Roger had his first child, and 2 years later, his second. After each birth, he thanked Bunny with expensive jewelry. Roger and Bunny were on the dance floor 2 hours after the party started. Her head was resting on Roger's shoulder, and she was snuggled up in his arms when Roger suddenly stopped moving and looked intently into his wife's eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box that had once held a diamond necklace. Roger returned to the jewelry store where he had bought the necklace many years ago and exchanged it for a pair of diamond earrings. This time, he was sure he would have the opportunity to give them to his wife. Tracy had finally found a man she could grow old with. She was 52 when she married Franklin Jameson, a widower with 2 grown children. She admitted to herself that although Franklin wasn't anything special at this point in her life, she probably wouldn't find anyone special and would be happy with a good man who loved her with all his heart. In her most intimate moments, Tracy admitted to herself that she had abandoned her special person because of her own selfishness and foolishness. She fell in love with Joey's good looks, his youth, and her own lust, mistaking lust for love like a foolish schoolgirl. Despite having had 11 good years with Roger, he didn't give her any leeway once he found out she was cheating on him. Who was she kidding, she thought to herself. She was too caught up in the intense feelings she got from illicit sex to realize what she was really risking. Her parents loved Roger like family and tried to make Tracy see the truth about what she was doing. It took her more than 2 years to admit to herself that she was thinking with her head below her waist. Getting an STD was a shocking experience for a woman who thought she was in control. Roger's marriage to her younger cousin Bunny was a blow to Tracy, especially when she found out that it was her mother who had brought them together. "She's family, Mom. How could you do this to me? Set her up with my ex. He dumped me, for God's sake," Tracy whined. "You deserved to be dumped," Mary shouted at her daughter. "You cheated on him. I would have divorced your ass, too." "Whose side are you on, Mom? You're supposed to be on my side. You're my mother." "No, I can't condone cheating. I raised you better than that," Mary said quietly. "Roger deserves a good woman, even if she's your cousin." "Why didn't Bunny even invite me? She was one of my bridesmaids," Tracy said. "She respected Roger's wishes," Mary said. "I think everyone agreed that his feelings mattered much more than yours." Considering that Roger, Bunny, and Tracy lived in the same town, their paths sometimes crossed. Roger was polite at best when he encountered Tracy. The cousins did little more than glare at each other. Eventually, Joey settled down and married. His choice of women was not what it had been. A robbery when he was around 35 left him with a permanent limp, and his once solid, muscular body had degenerated into flab. His quick wit seemed to lose its effect on women as his physical condition deteriorated. In his more reflective moments, Joey knew he no longer had the best choice in women once he passed 40. He settled for an average woman with an average body who seemed to genuinely love him. Even when he went out, women no longer seemed as attractive as they had a few years earlier. The police questioned Roger and Tracy after Joey was robbed. The detectives were convinced that the robbers took too much pleasure in hurting Joey rather than robbing him. As she had expected, no one questioned Mary Hewson about the attack on Joey. After all, why would the police suspect a sweet gray-haired grandmother, Mary correctly surmised. Although she blamed Tracy for her own mess, she knew that Joey was at least partly to blame for the breakdown of Roger and Tracy's marriage, so he deserved some of the punishment. Although she didn't tell Roger or Tracy about her intentions, she believed they would both agree.